Spring practice is already underway for some, going to be underway for everybody here in the coming weeks within our beloved Big Ten Conference. What are some of the top storylines featuring every Big Ten team within this conference? Spring optimism blooms on this edition of Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
The snow is melting, the flowers are blooming, I guess depending on where you live in Big Ten country, but we've gotten to the time in the year where we are going to see our favorite Big Ten football squads finally get on the field as a whole. This is really the launching point for the 2025 football season. This is the most optimistic point maybe for some squads, maybe for every squad for the 2025 college football season. Every team is going to be a surprise. Every team is going to go 12-0. Every team's quarterback is going to light it up and be an all Big Ten performer. Everybody is optimistic right now about 2025. So it's time to break down 2025 and the top storylines within the Big Ten Conference as we enter spring practice. I want to start off with two teams that are returning very experienced football teams, the Penn State Nittany Lions and the Illinois Fighting Illini. The expectations within Happy Valley and Champaign are at an all-time high right now. Both of these shades of blue, there is one position group that really has me wondering, and it's the wide receiver position. Let's start first with the Nittany Lions of Penn State. So it's a little bit of a 2-for-2 swap, and I've talked about Penn State and the wide receiver position on this show before. Trey Wallace and Amari Evans are both transferring out to Power 2 programs. That should maybe tell you what other programs think of these wide receivers that are leaving Penn State right now. In come Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson. I think the big question entering spring practice for Penn State is, are these guys plus players compared to what the Nittany Lions are losing on the perimeter? I believe if the answer is going to be yes, it comes down to Devontae Ross. Now, Kyron Hudson is a reliable veteran type of receiver, but Devontae Ross is the guy that I really look at and be like, oh, this could be a big-time playmaker on the perimeter. And I think what happens in spring practice and how they mesh and how the chemistry all goes, I know it's a lot of install and it's a lot of getting familiar certainly with each other through spring practice. We can only learn so much within these first 15 practices, but the coaching staff, I think, can look at what's happening at wide receiver, and I think they're going to formulate a plan to be like, okay, we feel pretty good, and then you have some of these other depth pieces, the Liam Clifford and company guys behind them, and we can kind of maybe spend our money elsewhere in the spring portal to really bolster our football program. Or are they going to look around and say, oh, we need more depth, we need more high-end talent at this type of position? I think that's the story, that spring practice and the storyline that's certainly going to come out of spring practice for Penn State. Because if their wide receiver room is good to really good, this is a full, complete, experienced team that we know can make a run for a national championship. Penn State was number one in my way too early Big Ten power rankings. Let's talk about the folks from Champaign, Illinois right now. And when you look at the returning wide receivers for the Illini, Malik Elzy, Hank Beatty, Colin Dixon, I think the expectation is one, maybe two of those guys are really going to elevate this upcoming season. Like losing Zachary Franklin, losing Pat Bryant, one of the best receivers in the Big Ten Conference last year, that's big. Like Pat Bryant, when Illinois needed to make a play last season, it was Pat Bryant o'clock. And now you don't have that reliable option on the outside. Spring practice for the Illini is going to be figuring out, or maybe start to figure out, who's going to step up among those group. I talked about the returners, but then you got to talk about some transfers. Hudson Clement coming in from West Virginia. Justin Bowick certainly is in there as well. Both of those teams right now, the wide receiver might be the missing piece, or maybe the question mark piece of the puzzle, entering for Illinois, getting to the playoff, for Penn State, getting to the national championship game. Let's go to the West Coast. Now, when I look at the USC Trojans and I look at the Washington Huskies right now, I look at their offense, I look at their skill positions, and I see some really good players out there. These are both offensive-minded head coaches. Of course, Lincoln Riley for USC and Jed Fish for the Huskies up there in Seattle. But both of these teams, a storyline I have for both of these teams entering spring practices, we need to bolster this offensive line so we can protect our offensive assets, and so we can get the most out of our offensive assets. Let's start first with the Trojans down there in Los Angeles. Man, they are gaining a lot of momentum, certainly, this offseason. It didn't start off too hot with a lot of those players from that great recruiting class that Riley had in his first year entering the transfer portal, but they've certainly picked up a lot of confidence, certainly picked up a lot of momentum as we approach spring practice here in 2025. On the USC offensive line, they lost 3 starters. Now, you ask a lot of USC fans, they're probably not going to be sad losing Mason Murphy. But the other 2 guys on the interior at center and at guard, I think, are the 2 bigger losses for the Trojans right now. That being Jonah Monheim going to the NFL and Emmanuel Pranon transferring to Big Ten West Coast rival Oregon right now. Now, the Trojans did go out into the transfer portal, and they got 2 very good interior offensive linemen. 2 out of the top 13 ranked interior offensive linemen in the portal, according to 24/7 Sports. That being DJ Wingfield from Purdue, Gianre Reed also from Syracuse. So early in spring practice, it's going to be, how are these guys going to be able to gel together, right? When you bring in transfers, sometimes it can be a little bit hit or miss, especially on a group that needs to be cohesive, like the offensive line. Over at left tackle, Elijah Page is someone, had his ups and downs certainly last season, but they're expecting him to really take a step up and be that guy that can certainly protect the quarterback, because you look at the skill positions right now for USC. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Jade Mayava, unlike maybe some other people right now in the national media. I think he was a little bit inconsistent. At his highs, he can look pretty good, but as his lows, he can throw 2 pick sixes against Notre Dame and cost him a football game, right? That's kind of how, and then you look at, they got a true freshman in Husan Longstreet in there as well. This is certainly not the peak of a Lincoln Riley quarterback situation at USC, but then you look, they might have one of the top wide receiver tandems in the Big Ten with Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon coming back. I think Eli Sanders transferring in at running back, you combine him with the Thunder that is Brian Jackson. I think there's certainly some things to work with there on the offensive side. But remember last year's offensive line, why Miller Moss became the backup quarterback. He got hit a lot. Now, maybe the sack numbers weren't as high, but there was a lot of pressure on Miller Moss throughout the season. He started to see ghosts a little bit. And if we start to get pressure, if we start to see the same things in 2025 with a guy like Jade Mayava that sometimes can struggle in reading a defense, then maybe that's not exactly a great combination for the USC Trojans right now. I think when I talk about USC, I'm big on 2026 and 2027 for them really hitting maybe a 9, 10, who knows how many victories that they can get. This year's got to be a little bit of a bridge year. Continue to show that progression at USC. Offensive line needs to be better in 2025 than it certainly was in 2024. I love Washington's skill positions. Buy stock in Demond Williams right now, the quarterback over there, a dual threat guy, and he is a great weapon. You saw what he could do in the Sun Bowl over there against Louisville. You need to protect Demond Williams, certainly at all costs. I love him. I love Jonah Coleman, a 1,000-yard running back that's returning to the Huskies this season. How about Denzel Boston? The team leader in touchdown grabs last season also had 834 yards. Amari Evans transferring in from Penn State, 415 yards and 5 touchdowns. I think those numbers could go up in a more pass-happy attack like the Washington Huskies and a more dynamic offense like the Washington Huskies certainly right now. So we've established that the skill positions and Washington can be an explosive team, but boy, this offensive line was one of the worst in the Big Ten. The defensive line wasn't great either, but I'm specifically talking about the offensive line here for the Huskies. Washington gave up 39 sacks last year. That was the most in the Big Ten. Look, they gave up 10 in the regular season finale to Oregon, but if you still take that away, they were still giving up 2.4 sacks per game, which would put them 93rd in college football. So this is a unit that if they want to get the most out of those great skill players, the offensive line needs to be able to block some of these Big Ten defensive lines over there. You lose a handful of starters, but you bring in a couple of transfers. Carver Willis from Kansas State, he's played a lot of good football on some good K-State offensive lines. Gerian Hatchett from Oklahoma, he actually started his career at Washington, played 8 games in that 2023 season, 13 games in 2022, so he's got a little bit of a familiar track record with Seattle, although a different coaching staff in there as well. Drew Azzopardi is coming back at one of the tackle spots on this offensive line. Look, they have to be better. They have to be better, man, in order for the Huskies to really take a big jump next season. Let's go to some of their other West Coast brethren, the UCLA Bruins and the Oregon Ducks. Oregon has had one of the best offenses in college football, top-ranked offenses in college football the last couple of years. How can Ted, wait a minute, don't you know things about the Oregon Ducks? How can you expand an offense that is already one of the best in college football? If you look at how Will Stein called offense last year, even in 2023 with Bo Nix, but specifically last season, I think he called it in a little bit of safe mode because of the talent that was Dylan Gabriel. I think when Dylan Gabriel transferred into Oregon, we all knew what he was going to be. He wasn't going to be the biggest and baddest arm talent out there. He was going to be a really good, experienced college quarterback that could get you where you wanted to go. And it got them a Big Ten championship in year number 1 in the conference. But with Dante Moore coming in, he gives you a higher ceiling at the quarterback position. With a quick flick of the wrist, that deep ball down the field, I think, is going to be a lot more prevalent within this Ducks offense, certainly this season. You've got some elite speed on the outside with Evan Stewart. I think he could put up Troy Franklin, possibly type of numbers like he did in 2023. Like, you have this offense in Oregon, quick release of the football, short concepts, medium concepts, sometimes the dismay of Duck fans, these short screen passes that Will had been calling, especially a little bit later on in the season. Now, I think you're going to expand this offense and include a little bit more of the deep ball. And I talk about that high ceiling that the Ducks have with Dante Moore at quarterback. They've got a wide receiver, the number 1 wide receiver in this latest recruiting class, and Decorian Moore coming in. Once again, we're talking about maybe the highest ceiling of an Oregon wide receiver over there. They're expecting him in Duck Country to put up Ryan Williams type of season, maybe a Jeremiah Smith type of season over there at wide receiver. You look at the tight end. Look, they're coming off a guy in Terrence Ferguson who statistically was like one of the top 3 tight ends in Oregon history. But once again, they're expanding and they're getting better with Kenyon Sadiq. PFF ranked him, I think, the number 6 tight end in all of college football. And I think that was a little bit underrated. I think there's another dimension that is coming to this Ducks offense in 2025. And seeing what we hear from Dante, seeing what we hear from Decorian coming out of the spring practice will be the first things that I will look for from the great Oregon reporters. Let's talk about the UCLA Bruins and expanding their offense. Now, if you look at them from a passing perspective last season, they were like middle of the road, 9th in the Big Ten with Ethan Garbers at the controls. I think a big part of them expanding the offense is the upgrade that is taking place at the offensive coordinator position. Gone is Eric Bieniemy. In is Tino Sinceri. He was the quarterbacks coach in this Curt Cignetti coaching staff at James Madison, as well as Indiana last year. He was a big part, when Mike Shanahan, of course, being the offensive coordinator, he was a big part to the offensive success in this system over the last couple of years. And what was the success of not only Tino, but really Indiana last year with the quarterback? They brought in a guy from the group of five that put up some good production, and they were able to get the most out of him in this system, jumping up to the Big Ten. The same type of thing is happening here at UCLA. Joey Aguilar transfers in at quarterback from Appalachian State. He threw for over 6,700 yards and 56 combined touchdowns over the last two seasons at Appalachian State. I think the pass game is really going to get opened up. I think the pass game is really going to get expanded. And we're going to be talking about some new coordinators here coming up in our next few bullet points. But this is all about install. This is all about getting familiar with the playbook here in spring practice. So getting off to a quick start, I think, is very key for teams like UCLA that is bringing in a new coordinator. Now, a little bit of a bummer for the Bruins. No Caden Robinson, who was one of the top targets for Joey Aguilar over there at Appalachian State. NCAA issue. He's not able to play this year, and then he's just going to enter his name into the NFL draft. But there is some wide receiver talent to work with. And when I saw what Tino Sinceri and the staff did at Indiana, I could maybe see something similar where there's some bodies to work with. And if you have a capable quarterback at the controls, that could be a combination for some good things happening over there at UCLA. Rico Flores, Quasi Gilmer at 345 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. This is my first time saying this name, so I am going to butcher it. Titus Mokiao Atamalala. There it is. 294 yards and a touchdown last year. I've heard some good things out of Titus as well. Mikey Matthews, Jaden Wilson, a couple of transfers from Cal and Arkansas, respectively. So spring is a time to really watch out for in Westwood to see just maybe how ahead of schedule that this offense is going to be. But I think if things really hit their stride in 2025, and if UCLA is able to really rise to the occasion, it's going to be because of this passing offense. I think the combination of the quarterback and the offensive coordinator coming together, which we know that spring is a very important time. These 15 practices are very important. I think that this is a UCLA team that could maybe frustrate some other Big Ten defenses out there as well. The offensive approach and the shift in the offensive approaches are very prevalent going into spring practice for both the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Wisconsin Badgers. Let's start first with Ohio State. Look, when you have Chip Kelly as your offensive coordinator, who over the course of his career from Oregon to the NFL to UCLA to Ohio State, he wants to develop a dynamic run game. And when you have Trevion Henderson, when you have Quinshon Judkins, yes, Will Howard was a good quarterback, but he was certainly involved in the run game as well. Like, that is an offense that's going to be centered around the run game. We know, hey, they could certainly throw the ball pretty darn good as well, but I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in an offensive approach with now former wide receivers coach Brian Hartline. He's going to be the offensive coordinator now for the Buckeyes. And then when you look at the personnel of Ohio State entering spring practice, I think that this could be an offense that is maybe a little bit more like the C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields era type of Dwayne Haskins era type of Ohio State, where they can really rip the football down the field with some of their future NFL receivers on the outside. A lot of people saying that Julian Sand can just flat out spin the football, that he is a fantastic quarterback. He's in a quarterback battle. I think Lincoln Kienholz is technically in that. He's not going to win the job. Great true freshman 5-star Tavian St. Clair from the state of Ohio is in there as well. But I think this is going to be Julian saying it. But you've got Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and you've got a great pass-catching tight end, a transfer from Purdue coming in Max Clare. I think this could be one of the most lethal passing attacks in college football. So going into spring, I think they're going to shift a little bit, and I think maybe shift back to what Ohio State is really more well known for. And late in the season, regular season, they just wanted to run the ball. Like, look what happened to Michigan. And when they opened it up against Tennessee and against Oregon and some of these teams a little bit later on in the season, you saw just how explosive that they can be. I think the Wisconsin Badgers are going to be shifting their offensive philosophy a little bit as well, and their offensive approach, but they're going to go the other way from where the Ohio State Buckeyes were, and they're going to go back to Berry ball, or at least close back to Berry ball, it sounds like. New offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes is coming in over there from Kansas. The Phil Longo experiment, well, it was an utter failure in Madison, Wisconsin. When you have a place that's recruited running backs really well over the years and recruited offensive linemen and developed offensive linemen really well over the years, it's really tough to all of a sudden, well, now we want good wide receivers, good speed. We want effective quarterbacks that can throw the ball a lot. It's really hard to shift that and all of a sudden bring in that type of talent. And as I said, we know it did not work at Wisconsin. But I think the big storyline for spring is them shifting their offensive philosophy back to a more run-based attack. Billy Edwards coming in as the quarterback. I don't think as much pressure is going to be put on him this year. It's going to be all about protecting the football and staying healthy, which has been difficult for Wisconsin quarterbacks here these last couple of years as well. You bring back 3 starters on the offensive line, and you've got a tandem back there. They were both 4-star running backs coming out of high school, but you've got a running back tandem back there that I think could be very exciting for Wisconsin Badger fans. Darian Dupree got on the field a good amount last season, and Dylan Jones, I thought Dylan Jones had better high school tape coming out than Darian Dupree did, but putting those two together, and you throw in Cade Yakimelli in there, this could be a run game. And what I have my eye on in spring is to hear just maybe how far along that this shifting in offensive approach and really diving back into the run game is going for the Wisconsin Badgers. The Michigan Wolverines and the Nebraska Cornhuskers are replacing some dominance on the defensive line. And that's what I have my eyes on entering spring practice as big storylines for the Wolverines and the Cornhuskers right now. For Michigan, look, no matter how good Damon Payne, Trey Pierce, Rayshawn Benny, Trey Williams, like no matter how good any of those guys play, they are not going to be Kenneth Grant and they are not going to be Mason Graham. Like these are first-round NFL draft picks at very valuable positions. It's going to be one of the best, maybe the best defensive tackle combination we've seen in the Big Ten and will see in the Big Ten Conference for some time. But I think the key in spring ball, coming out of spring ball for Sharon Moore and the Wolverines is, you were at elite in what you had, like I just said, with Graham and Grant. You don't want to just duck down to above average. You want to still be able to, you don't want to take a drastic dip down, I guess is what I'm trying to say, certainly right now. And I want to be clear, I do not think that they're going to take a drastic drop down. I think there's going to be good players within that group, but certainly not players that were at the level of a Mason Graham and a Kenneth Grant. So, Wink Martindale and this defense during spring practice, they're going to see what they have on the defensive line over there as well. And just see how much depth there is on the defensive line as well. And I think that what this is going to do, I think it's going to make other parts of this defense really step up. And I think other parts of this Michigan defense will step up. I really like Wink Martindale's defense for 2025. You've got your 2 leading tacklers returning, Jayshon Barham and Ernest Hausman. At the linebacker positions, you look at the defensive backfield, Rod Moore, that locker room leader, returning from an injury. Jair Hill, Zeke Berry, Jaden McBurrows, I think, are going to take another step forward, or I'm going to look for them to start to take that step forward during spring practice here for the Michigan Wolverines. So I think that they won't be able to lean as much on those defensive tackles, wreaking havoc up there in the middle, maybe like they did in the past 2 years. So I think it's going to come down to the rest of the defense to really step up and be a more complete unit. I think this is going to be a pretty good complete unit for Michigan. Really looking forward to seeing what they can do from a defensive standpoint during spring football. Bryce Underwood, that was just too easy. That was low-hanging fruit. Had to go with something a little bit more challenging for myself. You look at this thing for Nebraska. I talk about how maybe I'm confident that Michigan's going to go from elite to really good at the defensive tackle spot. I've got a little bit more concern right now with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Losing Nash Hutmaker and losing Ty Robinson. Don't forget, coming off the edge, you also lose guys like a James Williams and a Jamari Butler as well, transferring to Southern schools. Now, when you look at the defensive tackle spot, it appears that a guy like Elijah Judy is a top candidate to maybe fill into that role, and you're going to lose some girth. You're going to lose some Big Ten beef, I think, no matter what direction you go. Like both Robinson and Hutmaker, easy for me to say, were 300 to 310-pound guys. Big Ten, beefy, corn-fed, Nebraska type of guys up front in that defensive line. Elijah Judy, 6'3", 285 pounds. Riley Van Poppel, 6'5", 290. There's some transfers coming in. None of those guys are over 280 pounds, so there's a little bit lacking in size right now at the defensive tackle position for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But that being said, I feel better about the defensive end spot than the defensive tackle spot right now for Nebraska. Williams Winery, the former 5-star recruit from Missouri, he transfers in. Cameron Lenhart, a really good recruit, 4-star from a couple of years back. He certainly got on the field a good amount. I think that this could be a year, if he can stay healthy, that he could really break out. He could really start to wreak some havoc, certainly coming off the edge as well. But if you don't have the size in the middle, like they did in previous years at Nebraska, maybe there's some offensive lines out there in the Big Ten that could have some success running the football. Like, you go to the linebacker group. There's a lot coming back in the secondary group for Nebraska, but up front, there was a lot. They had a lot of departing players at like the defensive line and these outside linebacker and edge types of spots. Like, that's a big storyline to watch to see just what they have in spring practice right now. It's going to be a big evaluation period, I think, for this staff. And then they're going to have to look for, in the spring transfer portal period, if there's going to be some guys that they're going to go after to try to fill some of these spots to get bigger and beefier on the defensive line. Now, quarterback. When you think of quarterbacks, the Iowa Hawkeyes and Northwestern Wildcats, not exactly two programs that really come to the front of your mind. I want to start with the Wildcats, the Cats on the Lake. They're bringing in Preston Stone. You might think to yourself, wait a minute, that name really sounds familiar. And it should sound familiar because Preston Stone had a really good 2023 with SMU. Wait a minute, SMU, isn't that the team that made the college football playoff? Yes. In 2024, when Preston Stone got benched early in the season, Kevin Jennings took over and led the Mustangs to a really good season. So, which Preston Stone are we going to get right now at Northwestern? If we get good Preston Stone, it could be reminiscent of what we had in 2023 with Ben Bryant in Evanston, Illinois, and what they were able to do, stretching the football down the field with some deep passing concepts, and really keeping the defense on their toes with what they can do on the edge, with what they can do on the perimeter. If we don't get good Preston Stone, I think a big reason why would be because there's a lot of unknowns, I think, of the wide receiver position right now. Like, you're going to lose Bryce Kurtz. You're going to lose A.J. Henning on the outside. That's another big question coming into spring practice is, what does this wide receiver room really look like for Northwestern to be able to help out Preston Stone right now? I like the defense that the Wildcats have coming back for next season. Now, here's the thing for Iowa. Mark Gronowski. I love Mark Gronowski. He's one of my favorite transfers, but he's not going to be available during spring practice. So it's a little bit of a weird thing during these 15 practices. Like, you would love to have Mark Gronowski being out there during this install, being out there to really get familiar and create some chemistry with those wide receivers in there as well, but he's not going to be there. But I've got a feeling, and this one with Iowa Northwestern, It's all about raising the quarterback bar. Like from a Northwestern standpoint, no matter what you think of Preston Stone, he's going to be an upgrade. He's going to raise the quarterback bar as compared to last year with Mike Wright and Jack Lausch. For Iowa, Mark Gronowski, the experience that he has, the production that he's been able to put up, he continues to raise the bar. But I think the specific storyline for Iowa right now with Mark Gronowski, considering that he's not going to be in there, is these wide receivers. Somebody's got to step up at the wide receiver position. That's something that I've got my eye on during spring practice. Is there somebody coming out of Iowa City that can truly step into a role at the wide up, not tight end? We know how good tight ends can be in Iowa. Is there somebody at wide receiver that can truly step up into a role to help Mark Gronowski out once we get to fall camp and once we get to the season? Let's talk Indiana right now. Boy, this is a interesting year, isn't it? You know, they had that Cinderella of a year, an 11-1 season last year, and I think the big storyline coming into this year for the Hoosiers was last year a one-year wonder, or is this the start of some really sustained success for the Indiana Hoosiers? Last year, they had a roster that could stack up, and they had the schedule to go along with it, but the schedule might not be as equal this year. I think the roster is really good as well for the second consecutive year. Like if you put this 2025 roster on the 2024 team, I still think that's like an 11-1 season that they're able to accomplish last season as well. Sustaining success, I think it's a little bit different at Indiana because it's really hard to recruit football players to Bloomington, Indiana, despite the 11-1 football season. Ask any head coach in the country. They want to be able to recruit and develop through the high school ranks. But right now, after an 11-1 season, Curt Cignetti, just like a lot of coaches in the country, he knew what he had to do. He knew what he had to do. He had to go into the transfer portal if he really wanted to have success and take advantage of that schedule last season. Now you lose a good amount of guys. At a place like Indiana, you can't be like, well, we had a really good year. Now we need to be able to recruit. No, you need to keep on going into the transfer portal. That's a beauty about college football now. Different teams build in very different ways. And I think Indiana is going to be a team that's going to continue to build through the transfer portal at the very least through the next couple of years. They've got a clear model where they look at guys maybe at a G5 school or an FCS school that have put up a really high level of production, but they give them an opportunity at a Power 2 level, at the Big Ten level. The big thing entering spring practice, as kind of piggybacking off of what I just said, is there's still a good amount of transfers coming into Indiana. How are those transfers going to gel? Can you run it back one more time, just like you did in year number one? There are 7 projected starters on the offensive side of the football. Not as much on the defensive side of the football. I think there's really good players across this Indiana football team, but they got the difficult thing about investing that much into transfers is the spring practice is so big. These 15 practices are so big in a short period of time to install something to guys that have not been around this program in Bloomington, Indiana. So it's going to be big. Their rival within state, right? We had Indiana go 11-1. We had Purdue go 1-11, lose 11 straight games to end the season last year. Dude, Barry Odom, and I like Barry Odom. I really like Barry Odom. Please, Purdue, give him some time. I think he'll get you there. But please give Mr. Odom some time to build this thing. Just get back to the basics. When I watched a Ryan Walters coach Purdue football team, a lot of times it was missed assignments, it was blown coverages, they weren't playing basic fundamental football. And during spring practice, you got to get the fundamentals right. You got to establish what you are as a program. You've got to set the tone because you talk about transfers coming in. Indiana ain't nothing compared to Purdue. Ain't nobody compared to nothing. Is nothing compared to what Purdue has. They got everybody's new. Spring practice, these 15 practices. Purdue started earlier than anybody. These 15 practices are imperative to not only building year one at Purdue, but to really establishing what this Boilermaker team is going to be in the years to come. Everything's a competition. Nothing is guaranteed has got to be the attitude in spring football. Let's head to Minnesota. There's a lot of things to like entering spring practice for PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers right now. I think they're going to have another good defense despite losing a coordinator yet again. But PJ has shown the ability to be able to put good defensive coordinators in that spot and create success. But I look at offense. O-line, I think, coming back is pretty good. They've got a really good and deep running back room with some transfers they brought in some very good transfers out at wide receiver as well. My bullet point for them is everything but quarterback? ? Because you've got to recruit big, tall, big body frame and Drake Lindsay. That will be a second-year guy in this program. You also brought in a transfer quarterback in Zach Pyron, a former four-star over from Georgia Tech. Now, neither of those names really scream, yeah, you plug those guys in and they can win 9 or 10 games next season. That's not what it screams to me. But, and we know, I say, hey, we want to hear this coming out of spring practice. It's hard to hear anything out of the tight-lipped program that is PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But I think during spring practice, the quarterback. Like, we need to see someone really start to separate and really gain some confidence during spring practice because, man, I think this team has a lot of potential. I think the popular pick for maybe a surprise team right now is Illinois, or Illinois to be like what Indiana was last year. I think Minnesota is a team that you could consider in that possible group. But, man, if the quarterback play doesn't pop, this could be a team that could struggle to really break through to get to that level, and they could find Minnesota in a 6-6 area. You could find Minnesota in a 7-5 type of area. These quarterbacks, though, they have everything they need around them to be able to be successful over there at Minnesota. What is life going to be like for Rutgers post Kyle Monangai? These last two seasons for Graciano has been very big. Back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons rushing the ball for Kyle Monangai. I think Kyle Monangai is going to be a lot like Isaiah Pacheco, right? The former Rutgers running back as well. I think he's going to find a spot in the NFL, and I think he's going to be very successful in an NFL career right now. But that his ability to run the football and his ability to have really good games and establish that was a big part the last 2 years to Rutgers becoming bowl teams. Because, and here's why this is even more important entering spring practice, and who's really going to figure out and who's going to be that RB1 or maybe an RB1A and a 1B post-Kyle Monangai, you got Ethan Kaliak-Manis returning. And look, I think we know what Ethan is, and he's an average quarterback. He's an average quarterback, but if you pair him with a really good run game, you can maybe figure some things out. And he's going to be throwing to some younger wide receivers next season as well. The running back position, you're going to be looking at Antoine Raymond, Jay-Sean Benjamin, transfer from FAU. CJ Campbell is someone that they really like. They're going to be all battling it out to see who can have that leg up as that RB1 spot when we get to fall camp down the road. How about the Michigan State Spartans? I skipped over them a little bit on the graphic. Let's get to old Sparty certainly right now. We know the builder that is Jonathan Smith, and he's got to continue to build upon the foundation that is laid. Look, you went from a 4-win team to a 5-win team. This very well could have been a bowl team last year, which is, I think, where Michigan State fans wanted to be. That's the progress, and that's the progression that they wanted shown by Jonathan Smith and this coaching staff right now. Now, when you're building a program like Smith is with Michigan State, in today's day and age, it's all about retainment. And the good news is for Michigan State is that in the winter portal cycle, Michigan State had the third least transfer losses in the Big Ten, which is exactly what you want. The foundation, Aiden Childs at quarterback, Nick Marsh, who led the team in receiving as a freshman last season, Jack Velling, the great tight end who came over with Jonathan Smith from Oregon State as well. Like, you have the foundation of this guy. Joe Rossi building the second year of his defense. You just want to, I think in spring practice, through these first couple of sessions, you really want to see Jonathan Smith and this Michigan State team and these younger players really continue to build on the foundation that was laid. If they can get to a bowl game, win a bowl game this next year, it's going to really continue to show that progression. We know the talent that Aiden Childs can be. If he can just protect the football a little bit more and Nick Marsh takes a year 1 to a year 2 jump, this is a Michigan State team I think that could be tricky for some of the Big Ten in 2025. We're going to finish things off with the Maryland Terrapins right now. You know, last year they won one Big Ten game. They needed some craziness to be able to beat USC 29-28. Otherwise, they would have done a goose egg in Big Ten play. And, thoughts started to kind of creep into my mind. It says, what is Mike Locksley and what is this Maryland program without Taulia Tagovailoa right now? That's a big question because Locksley and Taulia, they, I think, worked really good together. And Maryland was they were winning 7 games. They were winning 8 games. That's, I don't want to say peak Maryland, but that's certainly within the Big Ten model, considering the Big Ten East division that they were playing in. Maybe that's almost as good as it can get for somebody like Maryland. So did the Terps peak? I think spring practice is maybe going to go a long way to possibly determining that fact right now. Justin Martin transfers in from UCLA at quarterback. He's a little bit of an unknown. They got a great true freshman that they like in Malik Washington from the Maryland area as well. There's position groups on this team, I think, that haven't been able to rise to the occasion. Some position groups a little bit better than others. Offensive line is one. The defense wasn't very good last season. If you don't have that high level of quarterback play like they did with Taulia Tagovailoa and someone like a Justin Martin or a young Malik Washington, this could maybe be a Maryland team that could struggle yet again next season. But man, I'm excited. It's spring ball. Hope springs eternal. What are your top storylines for your favorite Big Ten team and other Big Ten teams entering spring practice? Leave all of those in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.